To start off, I'm going to now present Orv Beach. And Orv was first licensed in 1967 as WN6WEY, and he was a novice class holder. And then later on, he got his general class in 1968, his advanced in 1969, and his extra in 1978. Eventually, he moved to W6BI as a vanity call in 1995 abouts. So he got turned on to RTTY or RTTY while in the Navy. He was stationed at Treasure Island Naval Station in the San Francisco Bay Area. So he's done RTTY for 11 years, doing various things like teletypes, homebrewed terminal units, and he's also done his own homebrewed computer interfaces and programs. So in about 1985, Orv did VHF packet radio for about 10 years, and he helped to build up a packet network down the California coast and east to Tucson, Arizona. And Pactor, he's done it for a couple of years, and PSK 31 off and on for a few years. Then in 2014, Orv started getting involved in digital mesh radio on the microwave bands. Thank you very much for attending again this morning, everybody. So we will now open our presentation number 1 with Orv Beach.
Okay, folks, thank you for the IEEE for inviting me. I I enjoy talking about this stuff. It's a new sub-hobby and a really valuable addition to ham radio. I'm Orv, W6BI, technical specialist for ARRL Santa Barbara section, and I'm an AREDN ambassador. The AREDN developers nominated, I think, 3 people so far as ambassadors, similar to the satellite folks, ambassadors, primarily because we're very active in promoting it. So I'm going to talk about the AREDN version of ham radio network. AREDN software is very similar to TCP over packet radio, only way faster. If you remember, oh, got to click on this. Packet radio is 1200 baud, and with the modulation scheme they use, 1 baud is 1 bit per second. In modern terminology, that's 0.0012 megabits per second. It wasn't especially fast back then, and compared to today, it's usable, but we can do better. The ham radio network links can be more than 100 megabits per second, but you have to remember that's the modulation rate, not the end-to-end throughput. For those of you who are old enough to remember dial-up modems like 56K, you never got 56K end-to-end. It's not the throughput. So the schemes we use stock wireless access points. You don't have to hack the hardware. So it's pretty much off-the-shelf hardware, which helps speed the installation. AREDN currently supports those 4 vendors: Ubiquiti, TP-Link, MikroTik, and GL.iNet. I will talk about 3 of those in this presentation. They come with their stock commercial software, but we take them and upload custom software made by AREDN for ham radio use. And once that's loaded and configured, they can create a ham radio TCP/IP network. So what does that software do for you? It's derived from the OpenWRT open source router software. And I highly recommend running open source software on your home router, either OpenWRT or DDWRT, and there are a couple others. They stay current and they're much more secure than off-the-shelf software you get with your home wireless access point. Anyway, the AREDN software supports the 4 brands of equipment I mentioned and over 70 different models across those 4 brands. The 4 bands, which I'll talk about in a minute. And if you happen to be in a spot where there is no RF connection to the network, you can in fact tunnel between nodes and get on the network that way. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. So the software allows operation in the Part 97 only channels. These are the channels adjacent to the Part 15 assignments in 2.4, 3, and 5.8 gigahertz. Actually, there's no Part 15 and 3 gigahertz, but I'll talk about that more. it supports, where the hardware supports it, the software supports MIMO, which is multiple input, multiple output, and the 802.11 wireless protocol, which properly manages that MIMO software, MIMO protocol. It also provides a DNS and DHCP services, domain name services, and dynamic host control command protocol, the one that gives you IP addresses and others. Also route discovery and routing information. Um, all of those put together make it much easier to get on the air. You don't have to worry about configuring routes, default routes, and other stuff you need to properly manage an IP network. So the wireless access points themselves, you have to kind of consider them like handy talkies. They're low power, typically 600 milliwatts. A few brands do a little bit more. And because of the bands they're on, the SHF bands, they're limited to line of sight. So like a handy talkie, you usually talk through a hilltop or mountaintop site, a repeater, or in this case, a node. Um, if your node does in fact hear multiple nodes on hilltops, it will always choose the best one because of the routing algorithms. They discover the best route, least cost route. So we tend to discourage direct omni antennas and use directional ones, beams or other directional antennas. So this is an old graphic I took 4 or 5 years ago. Um, I'm happy to say that things have improved a lot. Our best link in Southern California is about 45 miles, or maybe 1.25 trees. Um, Two's company, trees a crowd. It's strictly line of sight. Uh, Seriously, if you've got stuff in the way, you need to consider an alternate route. So the digital networking bands, these are the bands for which there's hardware available, which AREDN supports. 900 megs, 2.4, 3, and the 5 gigahertz band. I'll just mention 900 megs. We don't use it much, especially in urban and suburban areas, because we share it with every noisy smart water meter and power meter around, and we only have one 5 megahertz channel. So, and the gear is substantially more expensive than the higher frequency stuff, so it's not used much. So you've bought all this networking gear, you've configured it, you've put it on hilltops, and you've got a network, but it doesn't do anything. All you use it for is getting to the things you use, the services. And everything on this screen, video, email, web servers, and all that stuff, you can put it on the network and use it, the ham network, anything subject to the Part 97, the restrictions in the Part 97 regulations. And some examples, and these are just ones we've tested. We don't use all of them, but we've tried them and they work fine. And there are other equivalents. Feel free to explore. So Mattermost, if you've ever used Slack at work, it's a communications protocol that supports text and pictures. Mattermost is the open source equivalent of Slack, which is a commercial product. Lets you create multiple channels and move over there. It is accessible via a web interface, but there are also applications, clients for Windows, iOS, Mac OS, and Android. So here's a screenshot of one of our Mattermost instances. Eric KG6WXC was out in the desert near Ridgecrest when the 7.1 earthquake hit last year, or whenever it was, and he drove. They got quite a shaking. They were only, I don't know, 10 miles away from the epicenter. He drove over and took this picture and posted it here. The reason he was able to do it, although there's no mesh network out there, we have two Mattermost instances running, one on the internet, one on the mesh network, and they're linked together. So he was able to post this on the mesh network. Very handy. Voice over IP. Everybody who works for a medium or a large company probably uses a VoIP phone on their desk. This was pre-deployment. This is coming up on 5 years ago. an old junker Cisco phone, and a Grandstream VoIP PBX. We bought a commercial one because we weren't too sure about running open source software at that time. Here it is, post-deployment, circled in red. This is in the repeater shack on top of Sulphur Mountain, which is in northern Ventura County. Has a little over 24 users. We recommended people get Grandstream telephones to go with the Grandstream PBX because we can manage them a little better and push software updates. You can see from this one, I missed a phone call and somebody left me a voicemail. So the PBX gives you voicemail and conference bridges, which we use from time to time. So that was our first PBX. Here's the second one. This is Freepbx, which is based on Asterisk, running on a Raspberry Pi 3. We deployed that to a mountaintop in LA County, which is just to the east of Ventura County, on a mountain called Verdugo Peak. Recently got them trunked together, and we have about a half a dozen users on this PBX so far. So you can call users extensions on the other PBXs by using a pseudo area code. We have 3 other live PBXs in Southern California that we're working on getting trunked together, and I think all totaled there will be between 75, about 75 users. So the other service we use a lot are things called collaboration servers. These are the things that the gamers use. You've seen it in movies and TV with their headset on, talking to other members of their teams. They provide voice and video chat, for example, file sharing, desktop sharing, and I'm sure there's other features. Team Talk is the one we use. There's TeamSpeak and Mumble and quite a few others. Team Talk has many-to-many. These are chat rooms where everybody gets together. But you can also have one-on-one chats in separate channels. And you can set up as many channels as necessary, and I'll talk about that in a bit. You can either use your built-in speaker and microphone or a headset. In either case, you can have simultaneous full duplex conversations, which means you can interrupt the guy who's talking. And high quality audio, and I want to talk about this a bit. If the 2 stations who are talking have good, solid connections into the mesh network, and have headsets on with the levels properly adjusted, it sounds like the guy you're talking to is in the room with you. It's high quality audio, much wider bandwidth than the 300 to 3000 hertz communications grade channels that ham radio operators use. It's a pleasure to talk to people. If your hearing's a little bit challenged like mine, it's a pleasure to talk to somebody like that. Typically, very quiet background, very easy to listen to. Also supports push-to-talk, Vox, or an open mic. We kind of standardize on Windows workstations using left alt as push-to-talk. We have a weekly net. For that net, I close the office doors, put my headset on, turn on Vox, put my feet up on the desk, and just chat. Open mic is available. You could see it being used if you have a situation, an incident, a disaster management scenario or something, and nail up 2 of them and just walk up to and say, hey, I need to talk to Bill. And the other guy says, hang on, I'll go get him on the other end. Never used it, but it could be usable. So here's a screenshot of a past Wednesday night net. On the left, you can see everybody that's signed in. And we're all in what they call the root channel, all 14 of us. Down at the bottom, you see aux channel 1 and aux channel 2, and I just created those. What you can do is you can double click on it and move over there into that channel. And if your buddy moves over there, you can have a private talk. As many users as you want, there's no limit. And those conversations can go on concurrently with all other conversations. Typically, one person talking only takes about 30 kilobits of bandwidth, and on the mesh network, that's nothing. On the right, you can see 4 tabs: chat, video, desktops, and files. And I'm focused on the chat. Um, if you go to the video tab and people have got their cameras running, you'll see something like this. I mentioned that one voice channel is about 30 kilobits per second. Typically, we configure the video at 320 by 240 and 10 or 15 frames per second, and that's fine for something like this, and that winds up being a couple hundred kilobits per second. We don't use video every week, but occasionally we have everybody turn it on so we can stress the network and test it. And you can tell if somebody has a marginal link because their name will flash red if it loses too many packets. This is a lot of fun. This is the way you keep people using networks. You put stuff out there that they can use during the week, not just for emergencies. And you do need to test it periodically. So recommended. And by the way, this runs on a Raspberry Pi very nicely. This particular TeamTalk server is a Raspberry Pi 3. And when we had all 7 of us up here, 7 or 8 when I measured it, the CPU utilization on the Raspberry Pi was 10%, and network utilization was also 10%. So it easily supported it. Plain old email. TCP/IP carries SMTP, which is the standard mail transport protocol used throughout the internet. You can use Thunderbird. Web clients are available. Um, there are lots of email server software packages out there, and you could set up a standard email system and then route it to the internet if you want. Or you can use Windlink. They do use SMTP for mail forwarding. I'll talk a little bit about that. And there are all-in-one communications packages. I'll talk about that. This is just somebody's screenshot of Winlink Express. I'm just coming up to speed with it myself. Usual internet Winlink, just got mail transport across the mesh network working, and it's really fast, as you'd expect. So Windlink is not heavily used yet here in Ventura County, but it is very heavily used in Los Angeles County. And I asked their ARS leader to send me some bullets about how they use it. And this is what he sent me. Gateway access, the access Windlink gateways across the mesh network using either Telnet Post Office on the client side or RMS Relay on the gateway side. Peer-to-peer, that's what I've been testing. Winlink Express to Winlink Express using point-to-point connections. Gateway synchronization, I'm not sure what he is talking about this, but they tie them all together and the messages get synced across them immediately. And hybrid gateways, this is what is exciting. Message can come in on VHF, HF, and mesh and forward out via any of those as appropriate. So lots of possibilities for complementing an existing Winlink network in your area. All-Star, D-Star, and DMR expect internet or Ethernet linking, and you can also buy this equipment from JPS or Skymira for analog repeaters that aren't linked. They expect an Ethernet connection between them. The mesh network can provide that. We have a rather large network here that's starting to use mesh setup between their sites for their DMR stuff. And if you can persuade a repeater owner that it's a good idea to have a mesh node or nodes on their repeater site, it just makes your mesh network rollout that much easier. We're in partnership with a couple repeater networks here, and they're finding it useful. Weather station. This is my weather station. It's available on the mesh network and on the internet. Raspberry Pi and some open source software. The software is called WeWX, WEEWX. It's available for pretty much any OS. And it's highly configurable. And this is just the stock user interface. what you can see. Some people go crazy, and apparently they spend all their waking hours customizing their weather station interface. Um, I don't know where this one is, but I just took a screenshot of it. Eric KG6WXC wrote some mesh mapping software. It goes out and crawls the network and builds a database. It turns out there's a JSON file on each node that keeps track of its hardware version, software version, how long it's been up, all those vital details. But in addition, all of the routes it has and the qualities of those links. So in addition to adding that into the network, he put it on a map. And he's made this software available for people to use. And there's at least several dozen instances of it running around the world. Some of them post them out on the internet. So I've grabbed a few just for examples. This is Salem, Oregon. The purple nodes are 2 gig, orange is 5 gig. I think blue is 900. And you see one with no color that's gray, that's no RF link connections. It's tunneling in some manner. So they're doing a nice job of linking their network together there. Yakima, Washington, the guys up there are very active with it. I've noticed they've just deployed cameras out to a couple of those mountaintops there. They're using mostly 2 gig and 5 gig. This is kind of near and dear to my heart. A year ago, last October, I gave a presentation on mesh networking at PacificCon, the conference there, and got accosted in the hallway after the presentation by a number of guys quite enthusiastic about it. And at that time, they had no network. So this network here has come into being just this year, and they have plans to expand it. They're doing very, very well. Here's the Hawaiian Islands. I won't talk about this much. Jesse's going to go into much greater detail on this in his presentation. And here's the big daddy, Southern California. A couple of the developers are in Southern California, so we've gotten kind of a head start. About a year ago, I did an inventory of the database of everything you can see on the map there. And I came up with 325 nodes, both hilltop and ground level. But that did not include the nodes in the eastern quarter of this map. They've come online since then. So there's probably, I don't know, 350 to 375 nodes there. So what's available for equipment? What you can get is the 4 bands, and these are outdoor use. These are weatherproof. They have PoE, power over Ethernet, that lets you avoid having to run a power cable as well as your Ethernet cable up to the hardware on your mast. The hardware in these things is incredibly sophisticated. I can't believe they sell it for the price they do. And you have 2 radios in there, and they're both MIMO, and they're software defined. It's amazing. Many of them have built-in gain antennas, 2 of them, one for vertical polarization and one for horizontal polarization, so they can support MIMO. And the most recent versions of the AREDN code, well, last 2 years, now support 802.11n, so they can take advantage of that MIMO hardware. Just a quick note here, if you're thinking about buying used equipment, don't buy it if it only has 32 megs of RAM. The developers are bumping up against that RAM limit as they add features and stuff. If you have a 32 meg device, it may not support newer versions of the code. And don't buy them if they're MIMO. Don't buy a Bullet or a Yagi that's, single polarity. They don't work nearly as well as the modern stuff, and they don't mix well with the MIMO devices. So, old school, 8 years ago. This is what broadband Hamnet was supporting, which was a predecessor to AREDN. One brand, one model, Linksys WRT54G. In spite of having 2 antenna connectors on the back, it was not MIMO. modern gear is 600 milliwatts. That Linksys is 60, so you're 10 dB down there and only one polarization. Ubiquiti Nano Stations. I only, in this presentation, no longer recommend these. They're fine little radios, MIMO, available for 2 gig and 5 gig. And I'll talk about why I'm not recommending them anymore in a follow-on slide. So here's something that will always work for you. On the left is a Ubiquiti power beam. That one's 5 gigahertz. And on the right is the equivalent MikroTik devices. There's also an HP XL, which is slightly higher power. The Ubiquiti on the left comes in 300 millimeter, 400 millimeter, and the Scare Your Neighbor 620 millimeter size. The MikroTiks have a plastic hexagon grid supporting the metal grid on the right. Very lightweight, excellent for portable use. Maybe not so good if you live in an area that gets heavy icing, but very low wind loading as compared to the Ubiquiti on the left with a solid dish. A little heavier wind loading, but much more durable, somewhat more durable. TPLink sells excellent products. They're not nearly as popular as MikroTik or Ubiquiti, but I have one from day one, version 1, and it's still up and running. Their Nano Station equivalents I wouldn't recommend anymore, but their 5 gig dish works excellently, and they're all 64 meg devices. So even if you score one cheap, it'll support future software. This is not obviously meant to go on a mast, but rather in your shack. This is pretty much the second piece of mesh networking hardware that hams buy. And if you're in the know, you would just buy one at the same time you buy the node. And here's why. Logan, with the AREDN software, it'll supply PoE out port 5 to your node up on the mast, and the two communicate with a protocol called DTD, device to device, because the one in your shack is a node also and will appear on the network. If you plug port 1 down there into your home network, anything plugged into ports 2, 3, or 4 will have access not only to the home network, but also to the mesh network. And they're suitably firewalled, so there's no danger. Also has a 2 gig and a 5 gig radio in there that can act either as a mesh access point, so you can connect your laptop to it and be on the mesh network, or an access client. If you don't want to wire to your home network, you can have the HAP AC Lite connect to your home network wirelessly. These things are really useful. Highly recommended. So, typical outdoor installations, a bunch of pictures here. Why does he have 2 Nano Stations up there? One's for 2 gig, one's for 5 gig. They go up to the same hilltop, 2 or 3 miles away, I think. If one of those nodes on the hilltop goes down, he stays on the air. He's redundant. We do this at every EOC, at the county EMS, hospitals, wherever we can have multiple paths or multiple channels out to maintain some redundancy. Here's another home setup, the Nano Station on top, MikroTik on the bottom. 2 different bands linked together with an Ethernet switch down in the shack. Because they speak DTD, they'll do basically, you could call it crossband digipeating, but it's actually crossband routing. Just like you wouldn't put a Baofeng usually up on a hilltop in a repeater environment, a lot of the stuff I've shown so far isn't appropriate for hilltops. Here's a picture of something that's used very heavily on hilltop node installations. This is a sector antenna, so-called because it illuminates a sector of the compass. This is a most probably 120-degree sector antenna. This one's made by Ubiquiti. The beige box clipped on the back is a Ubiquiti Rocket M5, the radio. If you look closely, you can see the jumper cables connecting to the antenna coming off the top of the rocket. So here's what in Southern California is probably called a small installation. This is on a peak in North Orange County, which is southeast of Los Angeles County. It's a solar site. The batteries are behind us. And he's got a 2 gig, 3 gig, and 5 gig sector antennas and radios, and they go to a Ethernet switch in the green box at the bottom. Also got a PTZ camera there. That's a very nice PTZ camera. I think it's 30x. Here's a medium-sized site. I helped take care of this one. VHF and UHF antennas linked to a county repeater system. On the yellow container, the gear on the left side of the container belongs to the county. We share the container with them. On the tower, up at the top is the PTZ camera. The sector antenna on the right, top right, is 2 gigahertz user access, illuminates the east side of our valley, and you can see a bullet camera watching the steps going up. Down low on the front of the tower is a 5 gig sector antenna for user access. To the left of it is a 2 gig part 15 user access point for a part 15 network. On the upper left is a 3 gig sector access sector, which is used for my local backbone linking two other sites together here. The small dish in the center was for a test network. It's not used very much. The large dish pointing west is our 5 gig backbone to the rest of the county. Coming off the switch in the container is a couple of Ethernet cables buried going up the stairs across to a larger container, and there's a identical, very similar looking dish pointing east to continue the backbone east. And it connects to the 3 gig dish looking at us on the corner of the container. This looks impressive, but when it comes to mesh networking, it's actually a medium-sized site. Over and above that dish, all we have there is the 3 sector antennas high up on the 2 poles. If you're interested, that container is sitting on top of the base of what used to be a fire lookout. And this was taken right after a very bad windstorm. And that HF vertical, which is used for their HF remote, was fixed a number of weeks later. Since then, we've had another really bad windstorm, and it looks pretty much the same again. So the software, it's just web-based. This is the main screen. I'm not going to go to super high detail, but you've got parameters there, what it's doing. The real information is on the button you press for mesh status. If you go to that screen, on the right-hand column is current neighbors, left-hand column is local hosts and remote nodes. On the right-hand column, there's 2 kinds of local neighbors. Ones that are linked by RF in the ham bands, and those are down at the bottom. And you can see the modulation rate and the call sign. Up at the top, the ones that say DTD, again, those are device-to-device connections. Those are either wired together via switch or through some other Ethernet path. Let's leave it like that. It may be RF, but it's not the AREDN protocol. On the left side, remote nodes, these are more than 1 hop away. So it doesn't contain any information about their RF links or anything, but you can see the call signs, and then you can see a list of services on the right. The column that says ETX is expected transmission count, I think. That's an average number of hops averaged over time. It takes average number of packets you need to send to get one through. So the higher numbers are lower qualities. As a rule of thumb, you can get medium grade video over, if ETX is 4, 6 or 7 ETX, you can carry voice real nicely, and higher than that will still carry text. Some mesh tools, these are coverage calculators to find out if you have a line of sight view to another location. HeyWhat'sThat.com is really easy to use. RadioFresnel.com is a little more moderate. And Radio Mobile is a little more complex. They have a very large, very well documented manual on it. I usually I usually just use hey what's that.com. What's that.com. So where do you get Arden ham network info? It's ardenmesh.org. On there, software downloads, not only production software, but nightly builds for development software, how-tos, FAQs, extensive documentation. Steve, what's his new call sign? I don't, AB6PA has taken that over, and people contribute documentations, and he maintains it, and it's massive and very well done. Wouldn't hurt to just skim the sections on that just to know what's up there. They have Arden forums. There's about 2,900 members last I checked. They're fairly busy, and there are regional forums there, and I don't recall if there's one for Hawaii or not. Um, but if there isn't, you can request one to be made, and Randy WU2S, the web admin, will be happy to create it for you. There's a Facebook group. It's fairly active, 1,250 members. And I'm sure you have mailing lists. I run one for SoCal, although I think last time I checked, a quarter of the users weren't from even within California. It's on groups.io, SoCal Hamnet users. You can sign up if you want. You're more than welcome to. It's not a high volume site. I also have an Arden beginner's guide that kind of summarizes this presentation. I have it in a PDF, and if anybody wants it to distribute to your non-mesh using ham friends, you're more than welcome. Just ping me and I'll send it along. Okay, I want to talk about the ham radio allocations. We're not deploying much on 2 gigs anymore. There's only one really usable 10 megahertz wide channel, channel -2. We find, at least in urban and suburban areas, there is a lot of spillover from the Part 15 channels from poorly designed wireless units. So what we have in place we'll leave, but we encourage people to get up on our 5 gig network. 3.4 gigs was all, well, wasn't all ham, but it was all, let me rephrase that. It was all ham up until last month when the FCC took it away from us. We'll be grandfathered in for 1 to 2 years while we make plans. It's too bad. It was very, very quiet, obviously. The gear was quite a bit more expensive because it wasn't common. I think I have approaching $2,000 worth of gear on 3 gigs that I'm eventually going to have to throw in electronic waste. But that's the way it goes. This is the 5 gigahertz band. Lots of channels, and hams are licensed in all of it, but we share it with wireless internet service providers and stuff. From channel 166 up to 184 is a ham band. It's orange because even though we were secondary, the primary occupant of it, the Department of Transportation, never used it. They were going to use it for vehicle-to-vehicle communications, and I think the FCC gave it to them, oh gosh, almost 10 years ago. And they never used it. They claim they're still developing the protocol. Well, the FCC got tired of them, and so they've proposed, and probably will, expand the Part 15 wireless access into all of this band. We'll still have our channels under Part 97, but we'll be sharing them with Part 15 users. So I expect what will happen over time is the noise level will gradually come up. So if you're planning on deploying 5 gigahertz, to plan for the future, I think I would deploy something with more gain than you think you need to compensate, so you don't have to upgrade it in the future. You know, some is good, more is better. Something we're looking at is getting some funding from Ampere.org and their ARDC organization to have somebody develop some microwave transverters so we can take these Rocket M5s and move them up to the 10 gig ham radio band. Obviously, they would be highly directional, power limited, and used for point-to-point, but they will be available. And what you do, you would mount them at the feed point of a repurposed satellite dish, which, by the way, you can already do that. There at the feed point is a Microtik LDF5 light dish feed. You put that on a $8 universal mount, and you've got 23 dB gain over and above the 9 dB gain of the LDF5. Quite a few hams in this area who are suffering from HOAs are getting on the mesh network with this because satellite TV dishes are allowed. Your neighbors will never notice they're not pointed at a synchronous satellite. So far, so good. So, questions or demos? I will stop sharing my screen, Stephen, and I'll let you take it over.
Okay, thank you very much, Orv.